People name their children after, popular celebrities, public figures, their favorite artists or what have you all the time. It's very common when someone has a child that they name that child after a person in their life that they look up to or are otherwise a big fan of or whatever. It's really, really common. Which also kind of means that all of the people in World of Warcraft who are using special characters and so on to be able to name their character like Arthas or Thrall or Illidan or Sylvanas or whatever might actually be the most realistically named characters in the game. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player and so on. My name is Devilor, and today I want to dig a little bit more into the idea of, is this the end of Season of Discovery? And if so, where can Blizzard go from here? Now, obviously, I did talk about this a little bit in response to a question that we got last week, but I've done a little bit more thinking about it, and we've also gotten just the tiniest smidge of more information on the topic since then. So I thought it'd be interesting to really look into, not just what is Blizzard going to do with the remainder of Season of Discovery, but also what might be next on their agenda. What might be the next big thing that the Classic team tries to tackle, and play a little bit of what if and theorize a bit about what that might be. Before I get into that, though, real quick, I want to give you a heads up that I'm going to be doing a marathon stream starting on Thursday of this week and running for a week for the new release of Season 2 of Last Epoch. If you're not familiar with Last Epoch, it's an ARPG, much in the vein of Diablo or Path of Exile, and is, in my personal opinion, one of the best in the genre. It's my favorite one to play. And they have a Season 2 coming out for it, so I'm going to be playing that all week. We're also going to have some extra fun challenges and goals and unlocks and stuff that we can do along the way. I'll be playing on hardcore, so there's a lot of fun stuff that can happen, and there's going to be this, I have this idea for I'm calling it an Epochalypse sort of mechanic, where after a certain number of points in a given day, all of a sudden now I have these extra challenges that I have to do, like I have to get up and do 5 jumping jacks no matter what's happening right now, or a skill gets banned or anything along those lines. And I play on hardcore, so that could be a little bit, that could get tense. It could get really fun and really interesting. So if you're interested in checking that out, like I said, I'll be live on my Twitch channel all week. That's twitch.tv/Devilor. Starts on Thursday, runs all the way to the following Wednesday. And 11th Hour Games has drops going on for Last Epoch during that time, as well as a supporter creator campaign that they have going on, so you can get some fun cosmetics that you can use inside Last Epoch as well. So if that is at all interesting to you whatsoever, maybe you've never even heard of Last Epoch, but hey, you like Diablo 4, you like Path of Exile, come check it out. Like I said, it's my favorite ARPG to play currently. I'm really excited for this upcoming season release, and I hope you will be too. But anyway, what's Blizzard's next move for Season of Discovery? Where does Blizzard go, specifically the Classic team, now that Season of Discovery has been such a massive success? Remember the prior season, Season of Mastery, was it's not bad or anything, but it was just kind of it's classic, but with a few quality of life fixes and a couple of little extra challenges in there. And then they went on to Season of Discovery, which basically became a whole separate version of the game for nearly 2 years. It's been about a year and a half at this point, and I don't see it completely, they've even announced recently that they're not shutting the servers down anytime soon. So it's going to keep going on for a little while. What can they do next? What is the next thing for the Classic team? Now, they did put out a video last week titled Season of Discovery, What's Next? And I have to say, it was a great video. I enjoyed the insight from the development team. I enjoyed them sort of reminiscing a bit about how Season of Discovery came to be and some of the philosophical stuff that they were thinking about while they were creating Season of Discovery. But for a video titled What's Next, there was very little next to it. Really the only sort of next thing that they said for Season of Discovery and what is coming next for SoD was just that they're not going to take the servers down anytime soon. They said that they don't want to make people give up on their characters. They don't want to get rid of things, so they're going to leave the servers up for a while. And that, to me, means that they're probably done really doing anything for SoD at this point. If they had something new to say and they were putting out a video titled What's Next, they were gonna say what that's if they had something to talk about, that is the video that they would have talked about it in. They would have said something inside that video if they had anything to say. This is also the team, I'll remind everyone, this is the team that's been teasing things like the Scarlet Enclave raid that just came out was originally teased a year and a half ago at the original BlizzCon announcement for this thing, when they did the whole oops, accidentally we showed a bunch of slides extra sort of thing. They've been teasing stuff about this, what they're doing with Season of Discovery ahead of time for so long that if they like the way that they communicate about this thing, if they had anything, even an inkling of something that they were doing next, I really feel like we would have seen some sort of tease or some sort of discussion about it in terms of what their next content beats were, if they had plans for what those next content beats actually are for SoD. So from that perspective, I pretty strongly feel that Season of Discovery is now going to just kind of go into maintenance mode. Like they said this in the video, and I said earlier, they're leaving the servers up for a while, so we don't have to worry about it like, and Season of Discovery is over now, goodbye, or when your characters are gone. That, fortunately, is not something that we're concerned about, and I'm very glad to hear that that's the approach that they're taking in terms of like, not really like sunsetting SoD, but putting it into maintenance mode, essentially, allowing players to continue to enjoy SoD. Maybe they come into it later on and they still want to go back and play it. Maybe they're people like me who I played it all the way up to level 60 and then stepped away for a little while. I'm glad to hear that it will be sticking around for a little bit so that I have the time to go back and check out all the content that I never got around to at a later time. But if that's correct, and if SoD is now fully into maintenance mode, the classic team, they've proved themselves in my mind. They've proved themselves with Season of Discovery, and they've proven that they have the ability to do something really fun and cool and interesting inside the classic sort of paradigm, inside the classic philosophy and structure of how the game works. So to me, this means now it's time for them to think about what their next thing is. What's the next season, or what is the next step as a whole for classic WoW when it comes to these sort of fun new twists on old gameplay? Now, straight off the bat, there's a few obvious guesses and obvious theories and very popular theories about what they might do next. That let's just go ahead and we'll bite right down on those right away. Biggest one, of course, being maybe after having done SoD, which a lot of people have looked to as a trial for Classic Plus this whole time, maybe it's time that they said, hey, this obviously worked and this was super fun. Let's fully commit to it. Let's come out with an actual proper Blizzard-focused Classic Plus. And I did a video a while back that sort of dove into the idea of what Classic Plus is, and I don't want to rehash all of that here again. The reality is the idea of Classic Plus kind of means different things to different people depending on who you are and what it is that you enjoy the most about Classic. But kind of the core of it is the idea of taking what's great about Classic and what people love about how the game played back then, and really dialing in on that sort of classic feel and that classic archetype for the gameplay, but coming up with new content, new things to do, adding some fun twists to it that still feel loyal and specific to how Classic is supposed to be, but add some new stuff for you to do for someone who has been playing essentially the same game for now 20 years. And the reality is, SoD is a great example of this as well. The OG game, the OG vanilla game, has a ton of room. There's a ton of space in this game, not just like physically, but also just like in terms of overall content offerings. There's a ton of opportunity to add more just straight up content, more dungeons, more raids, more quests, and so on. There's a ton of opportunity to add that sort of thing and add a lot of that sort of thing to the original Classic gameplay. So the possibility of a Classic Plus where they just say, hey, yeah, we're going to take all of the original game, but then just add a bunch more stuff to it is completely viable. And I actually think that if they were to pursue a Classic Plus, not as a seasonal thing, not as something that there was like Season of Discovery, which was obviously then very much stringent on having Discovery be a central mechanic. I actually think that if they didn't have that in place, if SoD even hadn't been quite so focused on Discovery, that could have freed them up to do a lot more things and do a lot more of the stuff that people ended up very much enjoying about SoD without having to feel like, well, we have to come up with these weird convoluted ways for you to earn these new abilities, or we have to come up with this awkward mechanic for how you have to like grind this reputation and eventually learn what you get behind the reputation and stuff like that. A lot of the discovery aspects of SoD, beyond like the first couple of phases at the very least, those sort of fell away as time went on. And I feel like there's actually a possibility that if they went into the concept of a Classic Plus without needing that central theme to it and just literally being like, we're going to do Classic, but add a bunch of stuff to it and make it more of the game that people love so much, there's a lot that they could do with that. There's a lot of potential there in that idea. Like imagine a Classic experience where there's a more varied offering in terms of content difficulty. Like maybe we still have the old 40 player raids. Personally, I think they should just stick to 20 on them, but I get why there's a lot of people that want it to still be 40. But maybe we still have all those larger raids, but maybe there's also some that are just very difficult. Like even the Scarlet Enclave raid recently has come out and people were stuck on a few of those bosses in there for a while. So there's a lot of potential for Classic content that's actually difficult and takes some time to learn instead of just going and looking at a guide that already says all of this stuff and how to do it. And it's an encounter that's been figured out for the last 20 years. There's a lot of potential for stuff like that. There's a lot of opportunity for new and interesting mixes up on how classes work and so on. Like there's so much that can be done inside of this like little bubble of vanilla WoW that honestly, I think they would be dumb not to be at least considering it. And we do know that they were at least one point considering to do a Classic Plus, because they sent out a bunch of surveys specifically asking about that and asking people what would you want in a Classic Plus? What would you like this sort of thing to be? So we know that that's been a strong consideration for a while. And I would make like that, to me, would put the idea of Classic Plus as honestly probably a strong first place contender for what might be their next thing to do as a Classic team, is just go full on into Classic Plus and really, really run with it. But there's a few other things that they can do as well. One idea that has come up a lot since this video came out is, well, maybe at some point they'll do SoD Fresh Servers. Maybe they'll do kind of like how Classic Fresh Servers existed, where it went through all the phases and so on. They could do the same exact thing with SoD, where we start once again with that 1 to 25 experience, and then the 25 to 40, and so on from there, and going back through all these level up raids again. And in fact, the idea of SoD Fresh Servers is really, really interesting to me, because there's also the possibility that they could shake things up a little bit, like going through that again. Like maybe instead of Black Fathom Deeps as the level 25 raid in a second go around, maybe they did that with like, I don't know, Shadowfang Keep or something instead. Grab one of those dungeons, one of the other dungeons that's available, and do a raid inside of that instead, and put BFD back to how it was before. Or maybe just make it a 5-player version of what the raid ended up being, and so on. There's a lot of potential for different ways that they could shake things up going through the idea of SoD a second time. That to me is really interesting. That a SoD Fresh server doesn't have to be just the same exact stuff again. They could change up how some of the runes work. They could change up how, there's a lot that they could change going through it a second time that wouldn't feel like, not like how if they were to change a whole bunch of stuff in just regular vanilla WoW and then put it out and say, hey, we're doing vanilla WoW again. Oh, but we changed all these abilities. Like the very nature of SoD is hashtag many changes in a sense. So the idea of doing another round of fresh servers for SoD, but having a few different things that they throw at it in the process, to me, that's really interesting. And that would also make sense as like a next thing for them to do, is maybe they step back and say, okay, SoD was really, really popular. Let's just do SoD again, but let's figure out some different things to do this time so it feels like a new experience and that there's some new stuff for people to find. And of course, there's also the possibility that they just move on to the Burning Crusade. That's been a popular theory of something that will happen at some point. People have been talking about that since SoD was first announced. Like, wait, what happens when they get to the end of level 60 content? Do they just move on to TBC from there? And I would have to say it does, like that idea has had a relatively mixed reaction amongst the community. And personally, I feel like it's not very likely for a couple reasons. One, like I said earlier, this is a team that's been teasing things for ages. And I think if their plan was as simple as, and then we'll move on to TBC, they would have said something in that video. Like that's not, it's definitely a large undertaking for them to be able to do it, which I'll get to in a second, but it's not the most like out of pocket idea that it's something that they would need to save for a separate announcement. I feel like if they were going to move on to TBC for Season of Discovery, they would have said so in that video. But also to the point of how much effort this would actually take. SoD is a very different beast than original vanilla WoW was when the Burning Crusade came out. And TBC was always just kind of like TBC really was just a little bit more of vanilla WoW when it first hit. Yeah, there was a couple of like big game breaking things and game changing things that occurred, like adding on the extra talent points and adding flying mounts. But for the most part, it was just more World of Warcraft when TBC came out. So I things like changing to 25 player raids as well, but still like taking SoD as it exists now and increasing the level cap would just be super, super awkward. Like you would have to, there's so much that would have to occur to make that fit, that to me, the idea of taking the existing SoD servers and bringing them up to TBC, I don't really know exactly how to fully describe it, but that just seems kind of unlikely to me. That said, there is kind of this glimmer of an idea in the back of my mind of like, what if they did a separate SoD as a TBC addition to it? Like instead of taking our existing SOD characters with all the runes and their gear and so on and so forth, what if they did a version of at least the idea of SOD where they're adding, new runes, they're adding new class abilities, new content, and new things in general, but applied that to a version of old school WoW that has TBC in it. So I don't know, maybe that could even be like, that could be something where we start at level 1 and go all the way up through to level 70, just as it is. With how fast leveling is in SOD these days, it's possible, in fact, that they could do 1 through 70 entirely inside Outland, and you're just getting like 30 levels in each zone or something like that. There's also like the possibility that we start at level 60 and go up to 70, but all of the new stuff and the new runes and everything is contained inside of TBC. I don't know. I think that's something that's worth noodling on a little bit, kind of chewing on that idea a little bit. Like, what would a version of SOD look like that was TBC the entire time? Not taking the existing like level 60 Season of Discovery and turning it into a TBC Season of Discovery. Apologies, I just punched my microphone. They're not taking if they were not to try to take the existing SOD and just patch in Outland at that point, what if they were to create a new round of SOD, maybe even start it off kind of like the the SoD Fresh Servers idea that I was just talking about. Maybe they started off like that and then just have it go all the way up to 70. And then all the new like end game offerings exist at level 70, maybe some inside TBC and inside Outland still, but then maybe going back to original Azeroth, and maybe there's some sort of like spill over the Dark Portal sort of raid or something that occurs like that. I don't know. There's a bunch of ideas that could be done inside of that concept. I think there's something at least to consider there. And then on the flip side, maybe even kind of almost the opposite of that idea in a way, is the idea of leaning into the concept of lateral progression. The idea of maybe they start adding content from TBC. Maybe they add Outland in. Maybe they add eventually like Northrend in, and they add on all of these continents, or at least content that exists inside of these continents, but they do it entirely still at level 60. It's just continued content that comes out that's just a new challenge, but it's not necessarily like harder or easier than anything else. It's just still at the same relative power level to where things were before. And there could still be like, maybe there's a new trinket or a new weapon or something that has a proc that's just slightly better, but it's only a slight little upgrade at the end of the day. It's not like you're replacing all of your gear when you come to these new places. It's more about the new thing to do and the new challenge to sort of work your way into, so that people who are really, really passionate about SOD and who really enjoy this content have something new to look forward to every few months. I think the trick to that would be figuring out how to still incentivize the average World of Warcraft player to want to check out this content, because let's be honest, gear is a driving factor for the vast majority of new content releases. And if the new stuff that comes out doesn't give you things that make your character more powerful, a lot of players just kind of look at that and go, not really interested. That said, the classic community is, by and large, not as dedicated to that as the modern game community is. Whereas in retail, like if a new season came out in retail and you didn't immediately want to replace all of your gear, I think people would be like, what the heck? Why, even if it's only one piece, like, why do I still have this one piece from last year? What have you done, Blizzard? That's terrible. Whereas the classic community, they've always been much more, well, for the last several years at least, they've always been much more interested in just having something new to do. Like the new content comes out, but it's kind of whatever. And or at least the gear upgrades are kind of whatever. It's more about completing it and doing the new raid. And half the time the race to world first in classic lasts less than an hour anyway. So, or maybe less than a couple hours, but still. So I think they're inside of that environment, inside of the classic player base, there is definitely at least more potential for something like lateral progression to actually be of interest and be something that players actually go for, because they're not necessarily an audience that primarily wants to just make their character more and more and more and more and more and more and more powerful as time goes on. Half the time, they just want something new to do. And going to places other than Azeroth, like going to Outland, going to Northrend, and so on, going to places other than the original couple of continents in the game, would open up at least the potential for adding new content that doesn't necessarily require a ton of extra effort. Obviously, it still takes effort to put that stuff together, but it's not the same as like coming up with a whole new expansion with all brand new content, and still would give the opportunity for something new to do that, I don't know, it's an interesting idea to me at the very least. This is also partially because I've been playing a bit of Guild Wars 2 again recently, and that's kind of what Guild Wars does, where new stuff comes out and it's just kind of new stuff to do, and you don't necessarily need, like, you're not going to replace all your gear, or you don't need to replace all of your gear to go get it. Your gear that you got at max level back when the game released is still just as good as it is today. So that's kind of a little bit of where that idea is coming from, but I think it'd be an interesting thing to explore, the idea of coming out with new raids, new dungeons, new things to go and do that is just there for the classic player base to experience and have fun with, and not necessarily because they need to get all the brand new gear again. Or if they do want to get the new gear out of there, maybe it's because like there's new set bonuses that are interesting to play around with that allow some different builds that maybe weren't really that viable before. Or maybe it's just purely for cosmetic purposes because they like how the new stuff looks and so on. They just want to collect it so they can walk around it and so on. Like that sort of play, I think, can work inside the classic audience. So it'd be interesting to see Blizzard explore that. And also, it's possible that Blizzard just goes back to their seasonal idea and they say, well, we did Season of Mastery, we did Season of Discovery. Now let's come out with Season of, I don't know, Horseshoes or something. And that's what they want to lean into for the next season. There's anything that could be, like whatever their next idea for doing something inside of the classic environment could be. There's lots of different directions they could go. Like obviously in SoD, they did a whole bunch of playing around with adding new class abilities and having all these runes and stuff, and kind of filling out the base classes, the original classes rotations a little bit, and adding a few new specs, new ways to play in there in the process. What if they did a new season where they just straight up added some classes or changed around some, had all new classes to it? Heck, what if they maybe even tried to explore a fully classless system where it's not a function of what is your class, but more a function of what abilities do you have selected? Like personally, I think it'd be pretty dope for them to go back and try something. If anyone ever played the original Guild Wars, basically you had classes in that game to an extent, but you also had like just ability. You had a limited number of, you had 8 action bar slots, and those were your abilities. And your build was, what are your 8 action bar slots filled with? What do you put on those? I could see some sort of approach that takes a similar idea to that, where they say, okay, here's all these classes, here's all the abilities that you have available, but you can only have 8 of them. And now your build is figuring out which of those 8 buttons you want to have on your bar, which of those 8 abilities you want to put on your bar, and trying an approach along those lines. I think something like that could be very interesting, where you end up with, yeah, like I'm a paladin, but I also have Mortal Strike instead of Crusader Strike or something. And I decided that I wanted to have, I don't know, cat form. So I can go into cat form for a second as a paladin and pop back out of it or something like that. I don't know. There's a lot of potential for something along those lines. I think there's so much room inside the classic environment where, let's be honest, the original classes in the game are pretty bare bones, even by contemporary MMO standards, let alone like modern day, how involved classes end up being, which is part of why SOD has been so popular, because players feel like they're playing a complete class instead of, auto tacking half the time on half the classes that you're playing. So I think there's a lot of room for messing around with classes inside of whatever our next season could be, and just really blowing that thing wide open. Or maybe they, instead of worrying about classes as much, because that is kind of what they did with SOD, maybe it's something where they look closer at like changing up how loot works or something. Like maybe we could have a season where they do ARPG style loot for everything. So loot is like dropping like crazy, and you're getting like every dungeon run, you're walking out of there with your bags full of new items that you just got, but they're all dropping on like bands for how much how good the rolls could have been on the stats. So maybe you got a really bad version of this shield, or maybe you got a really good version of this shield. You had 12 of them drop while you were in there, and maybe one of them is good, maybe one of them is not. And maybe they kind of approach that sort of thing from a loot standpoint, where it's less about going and farming this one specific boss in order to get this one specific item on him, because this item is always like this. Maybe it's, yeah, you're still farming this boss, but that's because you just want any item to drop, and maybe it'll be a good one, and just kind of treating it more as like a chase thing. So there's more of a reason to continually be farming these older dungeons. I will caveat that by saying Blizzard has tried a few times to add ARPG style loot, or that sort of feeling of ARPG style loot into World of Warcraft. In fact, the The Titan forging system is one example of a way in which this was attempted and kind of didn't really go all that well. A lot of people really hated it. So they'd have to be really careful with how they approach it. But I don't know. It's a lot of people drew comparisons between World of Warcraft and Diablo when it first came out. So maybe there's something to that idea. Maybe they look outside of MMOs and start looking at more like survival game mechanics. Like maybe they do a season where your character actually needs like food and drink to stay alive, or you start like starving or whatever. Maybe you literally get sick and have to go like craft a antidote or something to cure your disease that you now have. Not like diseases in like something that a player puts on you, because that would make PvP obnoxious, but maybe adding some of those sort of survival game mechanics into it. There's lots of things that could be done along those lines that could be super interesting. Maybe they could look into a version of Classic that's focused entirely on solo or small group content. Like maybe they turn it, there was a lot of turning 5-player dungeons into raids in SoD. What if they went the other way around, turned some raids into 5-player dungeons and said, okay, now Molten Core is this like curated 5-player experience that you go through and you farm it like as a dungeon or something. Or heck, even like fully solo play. Like what, there's a idea that exists somewhere in which World of Warcraft becomes an entirely solo self-found sort of game where you still see other players out in the world, but maybe they just disable grouping. So you're just not able to go into things with another player. And so all the dungeons then become these solo experiences that you have to go through. Like, crazy idea that might not work, but there's like, at the moment, I'm just kind of illustrating all the different directions and all the different ideas of just crazy thoughts that come to mind for me that could be the sort of thing that Blizzard might be considering as well as they're looking towards new ideas to do for new seasons in the future. Maybe they try to come up with some sort of roguelike version of the game. Maybe they try to come up with some sort of like season that's based around speed running and trying to complete these different dungeons or these certain stretches of leveling as fast as possible with like leaderboards and everything. I don't know. I think at this point, the Classic team has proven that they have the ability to do these wacky takes on what might be some of the fun stuff, like what might be a fun, different way to experience Classic WoW that shakes up WoW, how things were back in the day. And if you want to play, fresh, original vanilla, like that still exists. You can go play the original game still. But maybe you're someone who loves that game, but you don't want to play the exact same game again. You want to do something different that feels like that game, but experienced in a different way. I think the Classic team has proven that they're capable of delivering on that sort of experience and that there's a market for it as well. Like there are people that want to play Classic WoW, but in a different way than it existed for 20 years. And in that respect, honestly, the sky's the limit. There's so many different ways that they could take that I could sit here and list off like crazy idea after crazy idea after crazy idea. And I genuinely don't think any of them would be like out of the question. I think there's really anywhere that the Classic team could go from here. And so it's fun to just kind of sit back and think about like, oh man, what about this version of the game? What about this version of the game? In fact, I really want to know what your ideas are as well. Like if you have crazy, wacky ideas for different ways that Classic WoW might be fun to experience, not necessarily as like a full-time thing, but like something that for a season could be fun to just mess around with for a little bit. I don't know. Maybe you want a season where Alliance and Horde are swapped and all of your Horde characters live in Stormwind and all your Alliance characters live in Orgrimmar. Like, I don't know, is that the best idea? Probably not, but why not? It's the sort of thing that's interesting to throw out. So let me know what your ideas are. I'm really curious to see what all of you might come up with as other like wacky, fun, and interesting ways to shake up the original Classic gameplay while still making it be something that is enjoyable for players who still love Classic. And of course, if you have any questions as well, please do send those questions in. I always love answering questions here on the show. If you are a patron, you can head over to patreon.com/Devilor, which, by the way, if you haven't checked out my Patreon, please do. But you head over to patreon.com/Devilor. If you find the posting for this episode, there will be a link to a form in there that you can fill out, and that gets your question as a patron priority to be answered here on the show. Otherwise, you can just leave a comment here on YouTube. I always read the comments. I don't necessarily respond to most of them, but I do read all the comments that come in. And thank you so much to everyone who continues commenting and giving me your thoughts and ideas. Because honestly, if this wasn't quite somewhat like, for me, this show is very much I'm going to throw my brain spew out there, and I want to see your reactions to it. I want to learn what you guys think about the crazy thoughts that come to my mind. And sometimes my ideas are crazy. Sometimes my thoughts are weird. And I appreciate it when I get called out on that. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, once again for watching. Again, if you have any questions, please do leave a comment or use that form over on Patreon. And don't forget to check out my Last Epoch stream coming up this week. It's starting on Thursday with the launch of season 2 of Last Epoch. And that will be running for a week, again, with all sorts of fun challenges and goofy stuff that we're going to be doing. If you're curious what all those challenges and so on are, you can go to my any of my social media accounts. Blue Sky is the one that I'm most active on these days. I'm just devilor.bsky.social on Blue Sky. There will be a link to my Blue Sky in the description for this video as well. But if you're curious about what that is, please do go and check that out. But I think I'm done plugging things for today. So thanks again so much, everyone, for watching, and I'll see you next week.